Hello. Di, you give me a yell when it's cranked. Di, it's cranked. Who are we missing? We're missing Jock and we're missing Gaynor. Where's Gaynor? Jock, is she up there? Okay, so we've had a slight technical hitch, and Steve's going to explain it to you.
The explanation, Your Worship, is it's a technical hitch, and that we didn't get sound at the end, which meant that anybody that was trying to listen in wouldn't have actually got what the end result of that direction was. So if we just for the sake of that, for anybody listening in and missing it, Council decided on, or gave us the direction around option 2, which is an enhanced feedback approach in an annual plan consultation. But we also said we weren't intending to do, an extended consultation process for the annual plan, and that was the direction that you gave, and that's what was missed out.
So that's just caught us up on live stream, so anyone that is watching now knows what the decision is. We'll now whip over, if we can, to long-term plan review, which I see is Steve and Pete. What's yours?
Yeah, so Peter's going to just take this. So he'll be taking you through the handout update session 2 attachment A. That's the table, and you will have received this previously. You just wouldn't have had the status column. So all Peter's going to do is work quickly through the status column for you, so that you're aware. And if there was any particular, there aren't many, there might be 1 or 2 things that need to be decided. Is that right, Peter? So we'll just work through it.
I'll do it quickly, but we'll stop, of course, when people have things to discuss. Just might cue people in on the status. The highlighted area is the annual plan 25-26, because that's the main game. But for each of those status, there's the year in which we're looking at doing things or completing things in most cases. So just quickly going through to item 1, that's a year. I won't talk to the topic if I may, save time, but that's for year 1. Year 2, water services extensions. That is for completion by December 26. And in year 2, the annual plan that we're looking at. Community grants funding, that will be completed by the end of this year, year 1. Number 4, youth services funding, again on track to complete by March 25, year 1. District plan review, you've been discussing that previously, and that's an ongoing rolling program. Number 6, financial contributions policy, that's scheduled for year 2, December 26, and that was prescribed in the annual plan. Sorry, the long-term plan, I apologise. Number 7, rates review. I might ask if Sharon wants to talk to that at all. Would you, number 7, rates review, Sharon?
Thanks, Peter. No, just during the long-term plan process, we talked a bit about looking at how footpath rates were rated, looking at various different types of rates and where they still how you wanted them to be. And so, yeah, that review is just not proposed to be done now because it would constitute consultation.
So, what's said in here, that would then be done in year 3.
Yes, correct.
Okay. Number 8, review of remissions. That's due for December 26, year 3. Any comment there, Sharon?
It's just standard. It's every 3 years, so that's the standard. Yeah.
And the next one is the voluntary targeted rate. There's a bit of commentary here which we might just dwell on. 9, this was written in conjunction with Sharon and Jules Steve. The existing VTRs were suspended pending legal review, and that's to be brought back once that's done. But apparently there's been advice that new VTRs are now available to use. So I just might ask if Steve, do you want to talk about that more?
No, it's just that we might have been in a spot of bother if we weren't consulting, because we wouldn't be able to bring that in. But if we're consulting now with the annual plan, we should be able to bring in those new VTRs, Sharon, shouldn't we? Jules, the reason for the VTRs, I mean, they're very useful instruments for people, but they're voluntary targeted rates. We brought them in for home heating and other things, but there is a bit of a gap that we want to close, don't we, Jules?
Well, we want to broaden what people can use them for things like financial contributions and like remedial work for dealing with water and wastewater infiltration. So we've had people who say we can't afford to do that. So currently we can only apply VTRs for what is listed in the long-term plan. So it's to bring that back and just widen that a wee bit to give some more instruments to hopefully assist people in our community to do the work they need to do, or to make water connections or wastewater connections. It's just slightly broadening that from what it is currently.
Right.
So the existing ones are all right,
The existing ones are in there, but we had a problem because there was a legal challenge to them and we couldn't actually do any new ones. But we're correct now, aren't we, Sharon, is that's all been resolved and we are able to do new VTRs, is that correct?
We have existing ones that we can't actually rate at this point. We need to get further advice on that, but new ones going forward we can. We can set up new ones, but the ones we currently have, we have to get more clarification and advice around how we treat them. Yeah, but the new ones, yeah, fine.
So you're saying you can't rate them, but there is a couple, so what's happening if they're not being rated?
They're just sitting on our balance sheet. They're not accruing interest. We can't charge that. And we can't rate them to repay them at this point. We haven't been able to since the review started. But going forward, we can set them up and you do it over like a loan and you just rate the loan repayments. And we're just working through with local government New Zealand and stuff like that, how we tackle the existing ones.
Okay, thank you.
I'll move on. Number 10, community housing, subject of a session later, but due for completion this year, financial year. Number 11, alcohol licensing. It's a review which will be done by March 25 this year, this financial year, I should say. Number 12, eyesight funding. It will be part of the process of updating the review and revenue and financing policy as part of the next LTP process. Swimming pools, number 13, is subject to a session later on, but that review is on schedule for March 25. Number 14, visitor information centres. That's due for completion in June 25 this year. Solid waste management 15, again on track to be done by March 25, and it's linked to another item. I might ask Jules if you want to talk to that at all.
Yeah, so there's we've said there's a decision process that we need to go through in terms of Mount Cooey, and that's going to be coming back in the new year. We've also talked in the LTP about the new waste services, so that's part of that wider review of the transfer stations and what waste services we're going to provide. Transfer stations cost us a lot of money for very little refuse coming into those. So we want to look at more efficient ways of doing that. Looking at the amount of waste that comes in, personally, I think they should almost be recycling stations because that's the bulk of what we receive through them. So that needs to be reviewed. It needs to come back to council with options. That'll be part of that, I suppose, overall package of what services we're looking to provide into the future, as well as the future of Mount Cooey from a financial and I suppose a viability perspective. If we're very successful in removing waste from the waste stream, it means it's much more expensive to operate our own landfill. So there's a balance between those two things. And there's been quite a bit of work done already, and the intent would be to hopefully, I'm not sure we're going to guarantee it, but to have our consent, at least if not nailed down, sort of about 95% complete by the time that comes back to you consideration in the year.
Thank you. So through you, Your Worship, I think Jules has touched on 16 and 17, that they were part of the annual plan, the long-term plan process, both part of year 2. And going to 18, the new cell review. Did you need to talk to that?
I pretty much touched on it.
Yeah.
It's part of that
Good.
decision about Mount Kiwi.
And 19, waste management minimisation, touched on that for next year. Year 2, and the transport, item 20, NZTA, that's an ongoing annual process. There's 2 items that weren't circulated, I apologise, in your papers last week. These are additional on the bottom, number 22, museums. There's a review underway for that, and that's scheduled for December 26th, and the Balclutha library review. There'll be a steering committee established next year with a view to reviewing the options by September 26th. Thank you. So going forward, I suppose through you, Your Worship, I'd ask the question, generally, is there any thoughts on those? Are people comfortable setting those reviews schedules in place as our baseline, and that could then inform the traffic light report going forward?
Thoughts, team?
Yeah.
I can't see anything we can take out, and I can't think of anything we put in, so I suppose it's just green lighted, are we?
Yeah.
John?
Well, I reckon you've hit the nail on the head here, Peter. Well done. There's some good stuff here that's been raised at the last bombs and plans. Well done.
Son?
Peter, there is no actual forestry bylaw. We're in the process of creating one. There's nothing to review. This hasn't been written yet.
Might ask Steve. Steve, we just had a question about forestry bylaws, but the point was it might be that it's a part of the district plan process.
Well, I know, I mean, it's a separate, if you were going to do a bylaw, it would be a separate process from the district plan.
There's a lot of clarification coming out yesterday. So that goes through.
Right.
Donna. Through your worship, Nico, one of our senior asset managers, is starting to do some discoverables around that.
That's specifically on pipelines though, isn't it? Not the wider issue of forestry.
Pipelines, but we can certainly expand it, look further.
Yeah, it's not issue review.
There's 1%.
Sorry, it's the odds. Yeah. Wasn't looking.
Okay, team, so we've got a directive for that. It is what it is. The only wind farms, we're going to get some pressure on from there. We don't need to. That's more what Simon was talking about. It will be done in a different process.
So through your worship, I'd say there's 2 parts to how this conversation has gone. One is what our reviews are under the long-term plan.
Yeah.
I think we've covered that. If there's a need to have topics on notice to be kept an eye on, that's
Come and see you.
Yeah,
That's not for today. Done. Okay, so we're Michelle.
Sorry, I was going to do that. So district planning, Peter, because that's the only time you can change like heights of homes and all that sort of thing,
Correct.
isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. So I know I've had a couple of different ones ask me about this sort of thing, especially on our coastal townships and that, where there's been lots of new building going on. And of course, someone will build a home that's allowed to build a home there, but of course now they've blocked out everybody else's view. So my question then is, when do we look at this sort of thing? Is it something we need to have a look at and change? Just because it's always been there doesn't mean that we don't change certain things.
Yes, so that's in the district plan review.
Yeah.
So at the moment, there is, the review process is that you can do 1 or 2 chapters each year. So it depends on when we did the paper, there was a listing of what chapters were being looked at and when. And so you're not talking, you're talking 2-3 years or anything potentially before you're looking at that particular section. But that's when it's done. And the issue of the rolling review is that obviously that was the only way we could afford it. But it means it's going to take some time to achieve it. But that's when those things are changed.
Further on from that, fences in front of houses, when will that be reviewed? Because we've ended up in Clinton with some fences that aren't really that nice. If there was some decent rules with regard 6 foot high fences when they're built.
So the RMA and the district plan can address things like how high a fence can be. It can deal with, can you see through it or you can't see through it, and all that side of things. The RMA struggles to deal with aesthetics, so it doesn't really deal with that's a tatty fence. It's not the place that does that. It just deals with the, should it be a 2 metre, 3 metre fence and the consequences or anything like that, right? Where in the yard can it go or whatever? That's what the RMA can do, but it can't deal with aesthetics.
Right, because it's quite interesting because when you go to Queenstown, they're literally tied to the colour schemes that they use and the plants that they plant up there.
There's a different thing between that and covenants, which developers place on. We put covenants on plantation heights.
Individual subdivisions.
And we did that because at the time we wanted to have a particular standard for that development. A lot of developers put high standards on their development to increase the value of the land, but that's self-imposed covenants.
And you buy a property knowing that's the restrictions of
So,
that.
so Clinton can't put its self-imposed covenant on Clinton that we'd like fences to a certain standard, that not just corrugated iron and
No, you only sort of address those during subdivision times, and so they have to be 4 subdivisions, or it gets very complicated, like in Lawrence, that whole question around where's the district plan going in Lawrence and how we're dealing with heritage and how do we match that. It gets really complicated around what rules you can actually apply through a district plan for things.
Right. We did try that in Lawrence and the community threw it out.
So just specifically, we've ticked this one off, we're right? Okay to move on?
Is this question here, any other matters?
Yeah.
For reviews.
Yeah, Kevin?
I just need clarification on 2 items that I brought up when this was presented in the last meeting. One is on page 279. Third from the bottom, the Opportunities Fund. In 2022, there was a balance of $77,000 in it. On the 31st of January 2023, 58,000 was signed out for the community hub. Therefore, a balance of 80,000, unless someone's put some more money in there, should be about 30,000.
Oh,
On page, you understood?
So is the question just, is there a balance?
No, the question is, it's something that we've discussed in the past, and if this is a mistake in this, if this is an error, it's the only error I know because I'm familiar with it because we talked through it. Should that error be corrected or not? Page 279.
Oh, I see. Okay.
we need the wiser, Sharon?
Yes, the money, you're right, the money has physically gone.
Yeah, there was 77K and you assigned the document and took 58K.
No, the decision was made.
Yeah.
To take it out, and money was actually paid, right? Because money in that sense. So it's just, is there a question around how we've accounted for it, Sharon? It might be you're quite correct, Councillor. It should be correctly reflecting the shift because there was money that had gone out. so we can get that remedied.
You take a note of that, Sharon? Judy?
And on page 281, I also brought this up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 from the bottom, there's a heading called endowment land. And I understand that was from the sale of a farm, an endowment land farm, which we got 970,000 for. It's now worth 663,000, the opening balance. So where did the other $341,000 go? Because the solicitor at the time said that money should be ring fenced and visibly available. And it's gone from 970,000 down to 663,000.
Well, again, I can assure you, we haven't spent money.
Part of that money was used by the Hair Works building, and we were allowed to do that because the income from the Hair Works building was used for the same purpose as the original endowment, which was so much percentage of it was to go to.
Sorry, Sharon, the councillor's talking about a recent farm sale.
Oh, apologies.
Yeah, that's a historical reason for why there's a balance in there. But there's a question that, like, the endowment land balance has been around for some time. The question the councillor has is, where did the money go in relation to the recent sale of council land, which needed to be ring fenced? So again, we just find that out.
Yeah, because we haven't approved the spending of any of it or anything.
And we haven't spent it, it's just that the account doesn't show that that's where it's at.
Thank you.
So we've ticked off that one and we're able to head to the next one. We're on our way. Who's doing it? Kelly. Did I see Kelly? I did see Kelly. Welcome, Kelly. So everyone, just the number 3 item for the workshop, community house replacement of cabins build project. Kelly.
Good evening, everyone. This paper responds to one of your decisions earlier this year as it relates to the cabins at Taylor Park. So a number of questions were raised at that meeting, particularly as it relates to the relationship with corrections, which was felt to be important and wanted protecting. Wondering about cabins and the use for community housing of some description or to help solve housing shortages. And also there was some concerns about Milton and whether it would miss out on opportunity as a result of that decision. We did a bit of investigation work around the current cabins and found that they had rather limited use. I got quite hopeful at one stage that we might be able to use them for work accommodation, but in conversations with Clutha Development, it became clear that industry's appetite at the moment for accommodation has dropped and did not appear to be something that was needed. Looking for other options, we eventually settled on the notion of maybe using this relationship to help develop the CHU portfolio slightly further. And that's what we've come to a conclusion with is probably the best use at the moment. The outcome that we'd like here is direction effectively to go into a costed project, have a look at what that looks like. And I think it would be really important, given the financial situation, to also consider the timing of it. Sorry, can we move on a slide or two there, Pete? As you'll see on the table on the screen, we do actually plan to do capital works on CHUs in future. And it would make sense, I think, just to consider what the impact would be of either moving that forward or leaving it where it is as part of that costed proposal. So happy to take the rest of the report as read and happy to answer any of your questions.
Questions to Kevin.
Thank you. A few questions here, Kelly, and I'll go through them. Are you familiar in June 2021 that the council brought a proposal to put cabins on Taylor Park to this council and it was approved to do that?
I am, yes.
Were you here then?
No, I wasn't, but I'm aware of the decision.
Right. Agreement was reached with the prison and the cabins arrived on the reserve ground and the Milton people said we don't want them on the reserve ground. And they were meant to be taken away. So that was if you can see that there, you can see the outline of the designated camping ground area. and they were placed just outside it, and hence they were removed. At the last meeting, Mayor Cadogan was a little bit miffed that we weren't getting $2,400 a week from them, which I agree.
So,
Because,
it's not missed, we were getting $300 a week a unit.
Yeah.
It's pretty simple math.
so the submission document had the designated area as incorrect, and the new designated area is now that there. And as Steve has told us in the past, that it's legal and right that we can put cabins on designated camping ground. There's room on that designated camping ground to put 4, 6, 8, 10 cabins, if you wish. Is there any reason why we do not go back and put the cabins on the designated camping ground site and create what the council want, is to sell the above ground assets and lease the camping ground out and get that project back on track, get some income and get the camping grounds.
So I think to answer your question, that would be a decision for council to make. The paper in front of you today does not preclude that from happening. So you could repurpose the bill back to cabins if that was the direction of council.
It's never been not the direction of council. The only direction was during the submission process that they be removed off the reserve land. And for some reason, they weren't moved 100 metres down onto the designated camping ground, which they could have been, and that's an illegal.
I think from the time, although we're getting off the subject, but every time you put a cabin on a site there, you're taking away from an existing tent, caravan type site. That's why it's existing. And that's why we did, we're trying to increase the capacity of the camping ground. So there was very little point in taking a caravan out and putting a cabin in. And that's why we put them where we did. It was quite an exhaustive process at the time. That's why it's the designated camping area. There are campsites already there.
They're not being used, they've been discontinued because there was a complaint that the caravans parked there looked into the swimming pool and those areas were discontinued.
So just on that topic for clarification, so we're repurposing that area for caravans again. There will be fence put up to give some privacy between them. And all of the long-term campers are being moved to that end of the camping ground to make the front of Taylor Park available for people who are travelling around the country.
Okay, as long as the councillors from Milton don't want a camping ground, or if the council don't want to sell that, I can understand, but I cannot understand why a proposal to put the cabins there has not been forwarded. But I'm okay, it doesn't worry me, but I know that it can be done. It was originally proposed to be done. It can still be done. You've got cabins waiting to come there. And I just don't know why it's not done.
Well, one of the issues is we're reluctant to spend any more money on the campground, and we're acting to make the campground pay its way. So Kelly and the team have got a plan to be able to increase the revenue for all the actions that they're currently doing without having to put cabins in. But we were reluctant to put another $120,000 or whatever of underground services in again for that, given the situation that we ended up with sunk cost money in terms of the undergrounds that's already there. So Kelly's plan for that is, because you quite rightly raised it previously, what do we need to do to actually make money rather than lose money? Kelly's got a plan to be able to do that. That's being enacted now. He's referenced that to previous reports from the council and updates. And we're doing that within the existing designated area, but we weren't looking at the cabins because that would require, additional capital outlay, and we've already been in trouble around that side of things. So
one more point then just to make is that after being involved in placing probably 50 cabins on camping grounds in my previous life, and talking to the local camping ground up there, one requirement they did want was cabins that didn't have any services, where people that were biking or on motorbikes just wanted a bed for the night and could use the facilities,
And you were wanting to know about repurposing some of the cabins getting built at the Target Correctional Facility. And it wouldn't be silly to look at getting one that didn't require service, just pair and some single beds or bunks they talk about, where individual travellers would just get a night.
So,
Okay, other than that.
just to finish that question for you, because you raised some very good points. So the decision today would not preclude that from happening in future. I do have a phase 2 plan for growth for that camping ground should it start to generate profit. And we would again be talking about the possibility of some sort of permanent dwellings on site to deal with particularly that group, because you're right, cyclists just want somewhere to sleep.
Thank you.
Councillor Lehman.
Well, basically at the moment, do not have an appetite to be putting cabins at Taylor Park after the fiasco that we've just gone through. I'm sorry, and the fact that I just do not have an appetite to be doing that. I agree that the camping ground needs to be paying its way and working through that process. And if we can get it up and going, who's to say somebody doesn't want to come in and actually do it for themselves and actually make a profit by turning it around? But as for council putting money into it, no.
Councillor Herbert.
Thank you. On a broader look, just looking at the outcomes sought there right at the start of the item, I think absolutely we should carry on with this project. And I think our kind of thoughts have been a bit tainted with what's happened at Taylor Park. But I think there's a general, look, we've got the ability to build these things at virtually cost. There's different levels of demand out there, and if we can make those meet, I think would be fantastic. So my question sort of comment is, Kelly, we're building a roughly a 16 square metre box now, which is pretty much one design. So so further down in your item, there's a picture there of what they call the aspirational unit design. So is that a transportable, or is that built on site, or is that because what I'm getting at is if we had different fit out options for it. I mean, we even the last meeting we're talking about some portable accommodation for Crown Street. We've got them sitting out here. Single bed accommodation, just empty, one room, as was being talked about before by Councillor Barron, or a modular design. We had 2 or 3 of them that actually clicked together and formed a house. I mean, people, for God's sake, they build them out of containers. I'm not suggesting that. But if you had someone reasonably smart that came up with a few different designs, it was all transportable and all modular, it could actually be a runner. Like it would be, we've got the people there that want to, and there's always side benefits of giving these people a future in trade. I think it's fantastic. So I support it, but I don't think we should let our vision be clouded with what's happened. We hiccup within the past.
Councillor Graham, followed by Catherine.
Yeah, I thought the plan was that once the swimming pool was pulled down, the probability of putting cabins in that area. Or was I wrong on that one?
It was stated that, if there is a consequence at some point of demolition of the swimming pool and that land became available again at some point in the future, we were intending that we'd need to do another reserve management plan amendment process to increase the designated area. But there was an expectation that we would increase the designated area to include that area as well, if that was the case. But you're talking an if and a long time away.
Now, and on the aspirational unit, a really good idea, but I just have concerns that there's businesses making transportable houses that they would be, their rates of paying for the opposition, like to have built at corrections without any labour content, as long as they could see it as, hey, if we haven't got a lot of work and we could be building these. I sort of look at that two sides and have concerns on one side of it that it could be seen as I say, GMI rates subsidising the opposition.
So through the chair, I should probably put very aspirational in front of that picture. That is, something's actually an apartment design. But just to run these two things together. So absolutely, there are limitations on what can be built within corrections. We probably would need a modular design, and that could allow for multiple variations on a single build. And so Hebe at the back there has been doing work with corrections to start to discuss what they can and cannot do and what those limitations would be. With relation to the building and commercial activity, part of this is commercial. We are obviously building something for a district and a community, and there's a social good component to that. But a big chunk of this is helping training in prisons, which will not be something that the commercial world can support. The outcome of this is community housing. So while I accept that there's a commercial component, I do not think it's necessarily something you can just compare on that one factor alone.
Because there's been issues in the past where one of the Christchurch prisons had pre-stressed concrete panel thing, and they were allowed to build the panels for any corrections buildings that were getting built, but they had to charge out their labour at whatever the thing was at the moment, if it was external. So.
Dane followed by Sal.
Well, thanks for the report, Kelly. Proposed directions, the council start to develop full costs. So I read through it and I'm like, well, okay, we've sort of moved on from these cabins that we've taken apart. I'm looking at what you're trying to achieve here, and what you're trying to achieve is to keep a relationship with corrections and move into actual community housing. You've identified some sites. This is how I've read it. So then I've gone back and I've had to think about that, and I looked at that little plan and I went, well, it's 17 square metres. Don't know the exact figure of what the 8 actual built cabins actually ended up really costing. I know they've sold 4, but the last figure was we had 10, we had 2 still not built, and we're at 780 odd thousand. So anyway, I started knocking up some square metre rates, and even with the free labour, I'll go for the lower rate. We ended up with 4,700, 5,000 a square. I thought, shit, that's getting right up there. So you're trying to achieve something 50, which to me is sort of minimum for community housing. So I put 50 times 4, 7, 235. I paid it off over 25 years at the current loan rate. I added the council overhead of 10% because that's what we charge for our community housing. They end up at 387 a week. And I added the rates that must be paid to that and the insurance. I put an estimate on insurances. I ended up coming up with the lower figure on a 50 square turned into cost neutral to the ratepayer. Came out at $487.47 a week to do the rental and return it. So I'm actually wondering whether we actually need to even do the figures, because to me that price puts it out of community housing. You know what I mean? So I thought, well, could we build something for 150 grand, $3,000 a square? Crunched all the figures, rates, insurance, overhead, council, because we know there's a demand for community housing. Crunch all those figures, pay off the loan. If they could achieve that square metre rate, it comes in at 386, and when you compare it to our community housing currently, 145 a unit, that's why there's demand, because they're 145. If we try to achieve our goal, the numbers blow out to 386 on a low. I actually think it's realistic, it's 487. So then I ask myself, do we even need to go down this route when we look at the true figures? And I say, no, you can't do this. Maintain the 98 we've got. Carry on.
Yeah, I had similar concerns too, Dave, because obviously the Plimsoll line that we're crossing.
Yeah.
But so I go back to the fundamentals. Do I think that we're doing the right thing by, what a great scheme it was with the prison? So I'd love to continue that. The commercial sensitivity, well, let's face it, if we went out, we wouldn't be doing it. And actually there's a pro quo pro. So then it comes down to those units. On the day I walked into the Taylor Park huts as such, were magnificent units. You know, every week we're dealing with people that are struggling with accommodation, people that are travelling to the district, people, everything. I looked at those Taylor Park huts and boy, they were the bee's knees. And I don't really see where that's changed because I still know of people sleeping in cars in the district this week, well, last week. There's still people sleeping in cars, not that they're, you know, you get all carried away. These are open for what is happening to the almost $10 million of cycle trail that went through this district and the accommodation that was meant to be provided. We've invested as a country 10 million. We haven't done one single job that I know of in Milton for accommodation, and those huts would have been perfect for a cyclist to pull out in. So if the huts fit the bill, there was never ever a problem with getting $300 a week from them. Never, ever. I think that we're just losing sight of the fact that we got, and I'm loving this, what say we put them here and put them there, because where we did put them, took about 4 council meetings and a whole lot of consultation. But there's nothing wrong with those huts. They were, you know, they were ideal for what this district needs right now. They fitted the bill for the money. The guys were learning. Maybe we are just getting skewered a bit. If we could find a satisfactory place to put them in Milton, well, I say Milton.
They don't have to be Milton.
No.
Correct. There's nothing wrong with those huts. I can think
Don't
about
call
it.
them huts, call them something better than huts.
Yeah, they're a lovely
And I just
accommodation.
make a point on Dame's talking about, and you just got to remember that when you're talking about square meterage, the smaller you build a house, the more expensive it is. You can't get away from that. It's like a water tank. The bigger it is, the cheaper it is per litre. The bigger the house is, the cheaper it is per square metre. You still need a front door and all that stuff. Where the house is 16 square metres or 160, so you still need all that stuff.
So Councillor Finch, followed by Mackie Wheeler.
So we are all getting hooked up on what was in Taylor Park. We need to move on from that. We need to do it now. I think we have a look at this, and if it comes out too dear, then we can go back to the small home, very miniature home, and carry on and have a look at that and see where they can be placed. Excuse me. Milton does need accommodation, and it is really lacking the accommodation. And so just to cut our nose off to be spiteful about what happened in Taylor Park is not the way we should be going. We need to get over that and grow up. So I think we look at this, see where it comes, and then we can go back and look at the tiny home.
Councillor Mackie, followed by, sorry guys. I'm going on an insulin pump. I've got a sensor in my arm. I can't shut it up. Whole time today, so it will go on. You just cheer it.
Councillor Mackie.
Did I read right with where those huts had to be altered before we could sell them because they weren't up to code?
No, so apologies, that may not have been clear. If we were to use them for a purpose not cabins, we would need to make adjustment to the oven to comply with rules to sell them as a house.
Right. And hasn't the facility, the corrections facility, lost its the practitioner who was doing the building? So right now they really can't build them.
Correct. So when corrections effectively hand over the building, they must sign it off for consent purposes. That requires someone with a limited building license, or LVP, I think it's called. LVP. Thank you. And at the moment, that person has gone. They are looking to replace them shortly, so they'll be back into signing those things off when they reappoint.
Right. Thank you.
Sorry, team, I'm not sure who was next on the. Councillor Bolwell. Councillor Bolwell.
Thank you. Well, I see the proposal there that Kelly has put up is that the council directs staff to develop a full cost proposal for the community housing development. So that will come back to us anyway and address the concerns that Councillor Catherwood has raised about the costs per square metre and such like, and from then we can make the assessment as to whether these units are viable financially as community housing units. The cabins that were built, they, to my mind anyway, they are perhaps single person's cabins on a likes of a work site or something like that, where that person might be spending a week working and then going home or something like that. They certainly don't really fit the category of full-time full-time accommodation. They don't have a laundry unit for a start, so they're not suitable for full-time living unit. So I think that needs to be taken into account, and sometimes that solving our housing problems in the district, that would only be for a short-term basis, and other times they talk about as being in visitor accommodation for a night or two. People are just travelling through the town, so there's a lot of confusion there. I think the community got confused about that too, with the messaging that was coming out about there. So I think the direction that Kelly has proposed, that we develop their cost proposal for this, is a good one. We've got land where we can put these units. There are limitations as to what corrections can do there. They'll have to be modular design, because all the cabins could only be a certain size, so they could take them outside, transport them outside the facility. So presumably they'll have to be at least 2 or 3 sort of units that are able to be joined together once they get on site. So that would be a cost too that has to be taken into account. It's not just the build of the prison, it's also the investment on site. I think it's a good option.
Can I just get the flow of it? Was Councillor Bowell the last, Kenny?
Yes, I believe so, yeah.
So, does anyone have a counter theory on it? Just one last thing before it looks like it's going to get, now, what's the cost of developing the cost?
Just staff time.
Right, okay. So has anyone got a counter proposal, or we've nailed where we're heading? Done. Thank you, Kelly. Cost my step.
Kelly.
Oh, you're down there, right out. We're on to community halls.
So thank you. Item number 4. So this was a response to your request during the LTP to review community halls. So this is sort of the phase 1, seeking further direction as required. I tried to focus on 2 components here. The first was on fairness. So are we, as ratepayers in the district, paying equal and fair amounts? And the second thing, I asked the question, are we as officers of council providing you with sufficient information to make both a decision and within context of fairness? In this particular item, so I've looked at fairness of funding, but I've also reminded you that we have a divestment plan for our halls, and we are partway through that. We have a rump of 11 or so halls that we've got left over, which are the more difficult ends to move into community care. And we're wondering if we should have a drop dead date effectively put on that, by which we would complete that work or dispose of those remaining halls. Next slide, please, Pete. Next one again. This table 3, is kind of the summary of the analysis work, and it tried to show on the bottom line effectively the summary of cost to different ratepayers in different wards across the area. You'll see that effectively Bruce is slightly lower, Clinton is slightly higher, the others are in that sort of $30 to $40 per person per year as a rate. So happy to take any questions to support your decisions.
Councillor Finch, followed by Luna.
So I'll just go back to that page, sorry, just bear with me. It had that Lovell's Flat is in Lower Clutha. Is that the new areas?
It's the existing, I believe, that this was
It's
complicated.
not in Lower
that.
Clutha. Lovell's Flat is in Bruce. And I totally agree with. Oh, that's right, sorry, yes, sorry about that. But I totally agree, Moneymore Hall, if you look at it, it's probably going to fall down. It's got nothing, it's just, I think you say bye-bye to it, because it's definitely not even being utilised, I don't think, for years and years now. It used to be, but it's in a very, very poor condition. And Lovell's Flat, similarly, if you go and have a look around in that, a while ago it was all musty and yuck. So yeah, I definitely agree with those. It's low utility, low. Not getting paid.
So I'll go to councillor Ludeman and then Graham, but, yeah.
I kind of question, I mean, we're looking at the cost per ratepayer and everything, but at the moment, are the community halls out there that aren't happy with the funding that they get? Number one, and because they all, I mean, it has to be remembered, they are rated against their community of interest. And so to be fair, how do we be fair across the district if you've got more halls? You know, you're saying, looking at the dollar values across the district, but actually you can't really compare because one district might have more halls than the other. And so, but for those that think perhaps they're not being rate funded enough, have they come to council and put a proposal for more funding? So they're the kind, I mean, just to say we need to change the way they're rated, I think they all have to realise that, well, funded, they all have to realise that they're rated accordingly. Do they just ask for money for the sake of it? There has to, I mean, to me, there has to be a need to, rather than to say one hall gets X amount and another hall gets, I mean, there may not be the need for all that funding. And then we definitely have to look at some of the halls that are basically need to be invested over and make a hard decision on that because they are also being rated and adding on to these figures. So, yeah, here's the time for a firm decision.
Councillor Graham, followed by Catherine.
Firstly, in reply to Councillor Finch, I think the council has had a review and contacted all the hall committees and that, and I think from memory, Moneymore and Nubble's Flat both got pretty active committees now, and Nubble's Flat is, I think, I'm more interested in Paul than the hall, but I think Alistair Lister's involved with the Moneymore one, and they're quite keen. So yeah, it comes down to the community, the committees in the community have got to decide if they want the hall or not. I think John Herbert's spoken about halls in West Otago where one of them has got all this money and they want to do away with the hall, and there's another one with next to no money that want to keep it. So the community's got to decide whether, before we say, hey, we're going to knock it down.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
But back to, on this, there's a table there that's got the income higher from the hall, and it really surprised me that Kappa Point has an income higher, $30. Is that for the year?
That is our record.
$30 a year?
No. To me, this information is what has come through council. So that's what I would just couch in terms of that information. So there may well be a lot more higher. It hasn't come through us.
Yeah. And I think there was instances or it was thought that was happening to that Kaitana Hall years ago that had very little income but seemed to be getting used quite a bit. So whether there was, if you wanted to use the hall, that you'd get the key off someone. So, because that's surprising. $30. What do you get for $30? You don't even get a packet of 20 cigarettes anymore.
And Moneymore and Lovel's Flat is zero, nothing.
So, Councillor Catherine.
Just clarifying that table there, Kelly, per ratepayer, you're meaning rateable unit UAGC? Correct. You came to see. Yep. Okay. And then, so I suppose being involved in a hall, there were a couple of them going on those reviews, was the biggest, so we're still on the trajectory for divestment. Community groups that I've dealt with, as far as the halls go, there were always the burning question was, what is the funding model? Which never got answered. So do we make a decision as we're taking this many rates off them? So I'll just get on the table, I'll just find the table here. Let's just look at, say, Clinton has a total of 27,822 of funding per annum. Oh, that's in the community ownership now, isn't it? Okay, so the one that isn't, we'll go down to Captain's OWACA, let's just say OWACA, through rates, the UAGC, 33,000, is, if you went to those committees and said, well, your secured funding moving forward would be 33,000 per annum, then I think you'd actually achieve a decision out of those committees. We've never made that, council's never come along and said, that's the budget you would have to be alone. So it's been, to me, it's been this real standoff point, because it's like they almost believe, the committees almost believe that we just get the hall and we're left on our own and we've got no funding source. But if they were secure on that figure, maybe you get a better response of community ownership. That's my feeling on the table. And then the ones that are actually doing nothing, we've got to stand up. We can't let our council own these buildings, these dilapidated buildings. We have a responsibility to those communities. So we have to really do have to divest these things and sell them and get rid of them. So we've got to put a line in the sand, and that's what you're asking for here. So in your recommendations, directions to continue, no. Go for the divestment, but with direction to the committees. That's where I'm coming from. Current funding system. So yeah, just a clarification to those committees so they can actually make a concrete decision. And the ones that have no usage need to go.
So just through the chair, I think it would be useful to also put a date on that to say, to get the negotiations underway and have a drop dead date that says if we cannot come to an agreement by a date, then the action will be to effectively start to sell off those halls. Because otherwise, I think you're absolutely right. This conversation's gone on for some time, and some halls are struggling to see the value in doing this. So,
Simon followed by me.
Yeah, you're just alluding to some of those income buyers. I know the couple of halls in my ward, they could be quite loose with some of their income arrangements, but secondly, the more important one though is, like, for example, that Pleasure Valley Hall, it's been a bit of a standoff there for a while regarding the earthquake standards, whereas it's probably 6 or 7 years ago since the report was done, and it's sort of gone nowhere in council as to what might actually be required to make that. And that community, yeah, sure, they might take it on, but they need to know, what's required, and then dare I say it, there's been no firm resolve here at council to get that sorted. And so just to put a line in the sand, I don't think that would be acceptable for them without having something set in stone around those seismic standards as to who pays or whether council pay at all or whatever. Yeah. There'll be other issues with other halls too. May have been some sort of promises made that may not have been delivered on.
So just through the chair, I think when we divest to the community, how they choose to run the hall is actually up to them. They get to make those decisions. If the record keeping is not so great, that's also their decision effectively. So I have no trouble with that. It does make, however, providing advice to you about income from these halls at times slightly troubling. So not an attempt at offending any particular hall. In terms of line in the sand, I don't necessarily think, and I probably misspoke before, I don't think you should say you have to have a decision by this date. I think if people have not engaged, if there is not a community of interest who say, yes, we are now in active negotiations within a time frame, we would say these halls have no community of interest and need to be disposed of. There are some complex issues with some of these, and it may take us longer to resolve earthquake issues, for example, as long as there is an active participation with that community group.
But I do know that it's a stumbling block. Yeah.
So just following on from that, let's face it, the divestment plan, the strategy that we've had hasn't really been happening. So I think we need to flush it out. And one way that we've flushed it out is to, there's an end of date here. If you don't want it, it's gone. If you do want it, step up. Otherwise, we're just going to keep on drifting with, yeah, we sort of want it, but we don't want to really do anything about it. So I'd like to see sort of what you were saying, Kelly. I don't even know whether, oh yeah, we're active. No, are you serious? There's, they can give you the 5-off if they want. I think we've got to flush this out, bring it to the head and get on with it. Michelle.
When it comes to the funding side of our halls, and as different ones around the table will know, some of the bigger centres are very much the hub of that community. And as we know, with looking at our townships going forward, our shops and everything else seems to be decreasing, but that main centre hub is that usually that hall in that area, and that's where everything is held. As we've gone through council, we also know that the insurance bills just keep climbing. And a lot of these grants that thing to run these halls is all well and good, but you got to remember these are all volunteers that are running these halls. There's a lot of time put into them. Some of them, with Otago for example, our insurance bill was 30 grand for the year. There's our grant gone. Okay, let alone making your money to keep your tennis going, to hire everything out, try and keep your building up to spec and everything else. You've got fire regulations that change, and then you've got to change your upkeep on that sort of thing too. So going forward, we also need to be realistic that sometimes the grants, and I know the halls can put in, but slowly they need to slide up too. And it's just so that people, so that our communities can keep on top. So, somewhere along the line we need to build that into it, Kelly. For a long time, I know, like Ellie said, they can come along to the annual plan, or they can come along and you can do that, and then you get a faux pas where you think you've done it and then think it carries on, and no, it doesn't. That's okay. Lesson learned. But yeah, some of them are, and like in West Otago, we had a hall committee. They were had a lot of money, but they decided it wasn't used anymore, so let's just get rid of the building. And we have another one that would like to do that, suggested that. We've tried, but they're still just hanging in there at the moment. But but put it back on them. Say, here it is, but give them the right figures. Tell them what it costs, what the upkeep is, how much is involved, because there's quite a lot involved, and there's a lot of fundraising. There's a lot of although you can go for grants outside of council as well, which is a positive. But it's a lot of work for a volunteer group to keep those halls up.
I just wonder, Your Worship, just to look at the, it's quite a complex thing in terms of the team where they go to. It sounds like there's a suggestion that all groups aren't necessarily having all the information. I know Jules has said, and the team does talk about operational grants and other bits and pieces, but there's a suggestion that there's a lot of information around seismic strengthening, what's the cost and all that side of it. That may or may not have had those conversations. I think the problem with the tipping point is, we're not actually seeing it necessarily coming back for decisions for a particular place. When we talk about fairness around things, the divestment strategy, our approach is that there should be a divestment strategy. We need to be moving towards putting it to the community groups. But the community groups obviously pushing back and saying, well, unless we know exactly what it's going to cost or it's going to be too expensive, what are we going to do? I suspect that because we haven't necessarily succeeded too well in completing a lot of these, right? It's getting to the completing point and making that final decision, is that I suspect that we might need to be bringing these back to council with the information. Because if you were a council building with not dealing with the community group and you had all these costs associated with it, you might make a decision from a council perspective, get rid of it. We won't use it. We won't. Purely looking at it from that perspective, you'd say no. Obviously, you've got communities that want to use things, but there's a cost on that side of things, and what is the ongoing commitment going to be? We're not getting that mix right. And looking at the paper, we haven't got huge aberrations, so it's not like, okay, all right, something we have to immediately deal with. I'm suggesting that really we need to be picking one or two key ones and using that as the pilot side of things around, are we at a point where we've given you all the info, right? What's your viewpoint? And you bring it to council then to debate what happens as a consequence of that. Because otherwise we're never going to get these things finished, and we're never going to see the true picture.
Yeah.
And also from council's perspective, a community group might want to proceed, but we might say, well, actually, we just can't justify that for that particular one. So a whole lot of different things. I think we need to start bringing it together for decisions once people have right information so we can get some conclusion. So rather than a drop dead date, Kelly, I'm just suggesting to council that we might more do it by hall specific and bring them to council so we can start making precedents, we can start making decisions and setting some policies as a result.
Brent, on a midday.
Yeah, Clinton runs its own hall, and I was talking to Sean the other day and about how good an asset it was, and then he got onto the side of it of earthquake proofing. So we were up for some considerable money to bring that up to the new spec. Is it 2035 or somewhere around there, or it's a few years off yet? So that's going to be the nail in the coffin for a lot of these, even these ones that are run by communities that don't have the appetite to run them themselves. They don't have the young people just aren't willing to commit to helping with these things. And so the community group, the few older, elderly people that are actually running them now, they just don't have the appetite to take them on. So I think the decision will be just made through attrition, really.
Jane, followed by South. Then we better get it.
Yeah, we'll move on. Yeah, so just in your report, page 22, Kelly, you had some questions and you were looking for some answers, I suppose, wasn't it? Is it fair? We see we've got the examples of $27 to $47. Well, percentage-wise, it's quite far apart. So there's no current formula. Should there be a standard formula, it would make it damn sight easy. And then those communities, if they were prepared to pay more above the formula, a standardised formula, because they had some improvements and they saw the benefits of their hall. So I think a yes to that. Is it fair? Yes and no is an answer to that. Should there be a standard formula? I think yes, but the community could decide if they wanted to pay beyond that standard formula. So, I mean, you could start a starting point at 40 or something like that and see what it looks like. If you went away with that figure of 40, you took that as the funding mechanism, you presented that to those committees and they saw a budget increase and would help. But then you've got halls like Councillor McAtamney's that has had no seismic strengthening on it. So those are things where that's got to be assessed before there'd be a handover, obviously. It should be, what was the last question? So, yeah, and it would resolve problems, I think, as far as fairness.
So thank you for that. So actions from here that I'm taking away, I just clarify, is firstly, we won't have a drop dead date. We'll effectively present 11 reports based on halls, based on negotiations with those groups. We tactically would probably start with the top and the bottom of that list because the bottom of the list has no supporting community and they're probably relatively easy decisions. The top of the list are the people closest to wanting to take on their hall. They just need more information. So I think that would be a general approach. It sounds like there is a desire to have some form of standardised funding, so we can investigate that and report back. That would obviously be a decision. And there was one more thing that I wanted to request today, which is at the moment you will have applications made by community boards through annual plan or LTP, which happen independently. Would you want to see a report at that time showing all of the halls and those applications in context of all of the halls for the purposes of fairness?
Councillor Martin.
I reckon it's a fantastic idea, Kelly. As an example, the Lawrence Tuapeka ward used to have an ionic town hall, which back in the day the council did exactly what we're going through now with halls. And they sold it off, and the community adopted a sports complex, which they fundraised, and the council helped them achieve that goal. They achieved it. They've got a magnificent asset there. It's up for repair and it needs renewing in certain areas. So there's a lot of money to be spent on that. And it would be good. And I do notice in your report there are a number of other pools that are community owned that apply for grants. And this comes back to another item that we'll be dealing with later. Is it sufficient for the facility? For that, because some of these spots are actually civil defence headquarters, emergency housing, and times of need. So yeah, I think we've hit the nail on the head. It'd be really, really good information to help form an opinion.
For me, it's an extremely long Groundhog Day, so there's a word of warning. In October 1998, I'd been voted on as a councillor, but I hadn't signed up. And we were ushered to the Kaitankata Town Hall at night time. And we went in there and it was a disco. Every seat was taken and then they were right round the hall. And Juno actually called the cops because things were getting a bit aggro. And Juno was going, if we have to do a runner for the door, we've all got to do it at the same time. And this bloody hell, being a council is exciting. And you know what we're discussing? Don't you spend another bloody penny on this hall. Not one more penny, the rates are high enough. So we didn't spend money on the hall. And 10 or 15 years later, the thing fell over and they came back. You useless bystanders, you never maintained the hall. So if we're going to do this, we've got to have public discussion and public ownership of the decision and the knowledge of the consequences they make. Because one group will say don't spend a penny and 10 years later, it'll be us. So I'm going round and round in circles and it's time to go around a circle and out the door, I think. Right. Another groundhog discussion, isn't it?
I just noticed that if you look at our fees reimbursement policy that lists 33 halls in this district, of which 11 are actually council-owned assets. So, and then we put funding into, of those 33, I think, including the council ones, we put funding into 18 altogether. So presumably some of the other ones are either just in limbo at the moment or the community's doing it themselves. So I think that's about one hall per 600 people in the district. And I recall in our district near us, there's 2 halls have closed down in my lifetime, which is Clarendon and Millburn. Operating. So we're also presuming there's other places in the district as well. So now that we don't just get around on horse and cart, I wonder just how many of these halls do we actually need in this district? Likes of what was the Bruce Ward, the likes of Moneymore and Ruggles Flat, judging by the use of them. And presume every time somebody wants to use them anyway, they have to go in and remove the starlings' nests and things like that. So I think there's an opportunity here for rationalisation. Certainly some of then there's other halls, like Cleator Valley's an obvious one, which is, I think it's an important one to the community. So I think we need to make some tough decisions on the halls. The court, late former councillor Peter McPherson, he was hot on this topic too, but never really got any traction on it.
And while we're on the story of tough decisions, the last time I was in the Milton Hall and you look at the corners, it'll obliterate all of that. That's extremely tough decision. So yeah, we're just going to have to grow one.
So I finally just want to acknowledge Cosmos and Justin, who did most of the legwork going out and visiting all of these halls.
Thank you. So we've got the direction that's needed. Onwards to our community pools.
Right, so item number 6, community pools. I left the best to last.
I was going to say we left the easiest to last.
So again, this came out of your LTP deliberations, and again the question was, is current funding fair? And again, I've asked the question, is it transparent? Because if it is not, then it's very difficult to make fair decisions. Just a couple of observations about visiting some of the pools. You've already touched on it. The ops grants are not sufficient to cover all operational pool, and they are not inflation adjusted. So over time, they are deteriorating. Some of the pools expressed deep concern about the rising cost of power, of chemicals. So they are starting to struggle a little bit with their operational grants. It did make me wonder what operational grant meant to us and to our partners, whether that was simply a stipend, whether it was meant to be adjusted as a percentage of total operational costs, whether it was meant to be all. So there's some questions, I think, to be answered around what is it that we mean by operational grants. Just about every, and I did not get to every single pool, but the ones I did visit were fantastic facilities. They were really quite impressive. But what was also really clear is that the community are putting a huge number of hours in behind that, and they have limited revenue potential. So you can, the population does not shift wildly. Only so many people use the pool. It means that they don't have huge revenue potential outside of applying for funding in other places, and that does raise a bit of a risk flag. There's also some issues around capital planning for the future. When you replace a filter or other equipment, a heating plant, for example, at a pool, these are big capital items. They do wear out over time, and it would be dreadful for the district if half a dozen of them went out at the same moment across the district, because I'm pretty sure all of those groups would be here asking for money. So there may be a need to think about long-term capital planning and support of community pools into the future as well. Just next slide, please, Pete. So this was again an attempt to break all of that down into what is fair if you think about it from a ratepayer and board. And you can see that we effectively end up with three different categories. So we end up with a group which is West Otago, Owaka and Clinton, which are about that $73 per ratepayer. You've got a slightly higher one in Lawrence, which is where the loans start. So they are sort of covering that loan. Milton is at 118, and obviously Lower Clutha is 191. The column on the far right is a percentage of funding that you keep in your ward as opposed to pay to other people in other areas. Now, again, please treat it with a little bit of caution because the numbers are quite scary, but you've got to see it in context of the total payment. So some of those people are paying 2.5 times more for pools than some of those people are only keeping a few percent locally.
Sorry, Kelly. I suppose one of the principal points though about this in terms of your analysis is that you can guarantee the costs are skewed in relation to the town pools being included in the groupings versus the community pools that are on a totally different funding system, right? So what you've done though is you haven't excluded them, you've just put them all in there, and it's showing what we would expect to probably see from that skewed result. If you pulled out Milton and if you pulled out Clutha from as town pools and just had the idea of the community pool related side of things, it would be a different picture completely. So councils just need to understand you are not making any distinction in comparison, but there's actually a distinction in comparison in terms of the operations and how they're funded.
Councillor Ludeman, followed by me.
Kelly, can you just, do you know if some of the pools that are attached to schools, are they getting Ministry of Education funding as well towards those pools? Because, like so, Clutha Valley, there's a Waira school, some of them are actually on school grounds. Are they getting Ministry of Education funding?
I think it's possibly more complex than that. So technically in some locations, the Ministry of Education are funding assets which help our pools. So Lawrence is an example of that. Some students get effectively free lessons, others have to pay for them. It is widely distributed, and it comes down a lot to the fact that for community pools, they make their own decisions, so they can't be covered by our policy either. So I'm afraid it's not a simple answer. Pete, could I have the next slide?
Oh, hang on. Councillor Leggett-Tammany's got his hand up.
Oh, sorry, as you were, no, I'm only 1,000 miles away, John.
I was just going to mention, I did actually ask Kelly about this, the La Clutha one, I struggled with Clutha Valley and Kaitankata being included there, especially that big chunk of money. Most of that for the Kaitankata and Clutha Valley ratepayers is going to the Clutha pool. For the people who live in Kaitankata and Clutha Valley, the Clutha pool is no more their own pool than what, say, a Waka or Clinton would be. somebody might spread it to use it in the winter, but summertime, Tuesday, Please Valley pool is 28 degrees. So there'll be no one in that district using the Valparaiso pool for the next several months. I think it's exactly the same. Summertime, they'll be, yeah, so we're put in there, but because of that flow, but essentially, yeah, we're actually subsidising an awful lot of Valparaiso pool and then paying our own way.
Yeah, I see, well, for we content here, where I come from, I've been involved in the running of the poll, and each year the education board who are part of it's on their ground, they just want to pay less and less and less and less. I see we're rated 44,000, and we get 1% back, which equates to basically about 4,000. So I don't really think that's fair. Terribly unfair.
Yeah, but again, I think the problem is you've got the huge money spenders of Balclutha and Milton skewing all the figures that you're talking about. I mean, I appreciate how it's been calculated, but it's not the right comparison. If you were in a principle sense saying that's it, we're out of the business of council-run pool in terms of Balclutha and Milton in that sense, you're still going to have a significant amount of cost associated with it because of all the debt and things attached to those outfits, and also operating costs and that. But then you'd say, well, that's a reduction in cost and go for it. But at the moment, that's not, for a number of reasons, that's not how these things are done. It's not correct to say, hey, we're our community pool is subsidising the Balclutha pool. No, district ratepayers are subsidising the Balclutha pool, right? Because revenue doesn't equal expenditure. Ratepayers across the district are subsidising that pool. The problem we're having is that we're comparing community pool to town pool and then doing everything on that basis. It's not like that. The level of service is a town pool doing this. Until or unless you change the level of service, you cannot compare, this is my view, you cannot compare community pools to town pools. And we're getting ourselves in sort of knots and twists, having that comparison, but that's the current thing.
Councillor Brown, followed by Catherine.
Hypothetical. Koi booms because of the southern scenic route goes past Koi. Right, so it becomes the second largest town from the district.
Yep.
So what stage does the community pool transition into a public pool?
Yeah, good question, because your LTP is currently projecting and forecasting there's only two growth areas, which are Milton and Balclutha, right? So that's the growth areas. That's the investment in the growth areas when you're thinking out population 25 years. You are correct. If some fundamental shift occurs and we do our strategising, and we look at Kaitangata and suddenly Kaitangata leaps out as being the third growth area, and you would be thinking, what do we need for 30, 35 years? And you look at all the facilities, and including a pool, for example, and you might very well reach a conclusion that you need to convert that from community to town. But it goes through that type of a process, and it's based on that. When we talked about Milton and where's Milton going, it's all on the basis of where is Milton looking at in 30, 35 years, because that's the growth area. All that industrial hasn't come on yet, but it's there, it's approved. At some point, the stars will align and that start going to be filling up, and that's going to be powering through, right? And it'll power through the district. That's what we've identified. Yeah, that's what our strategic planning has identified. And that's what we base our investment on. So you sink your investments into that. That's why you're spending on the Main Street upgrade and that side of things, Milton. And you look at it then in relation to other communities, and you tailor your investment on that basis too. And our levels of service for those other communities are community pools. But you're right, at some point in the future, and you make a strategic decision, and you say 10, 15, 30 years from now, we'll start aiming for Kaitangata facilities to be in that sort of a space. But that's, long time now, but it could happen to any community And that's why you strategise and you change and you look at what the forecast.
So Dane and then Jules.
Oh, yeah. Just a quick question, I suppose it's directed to Sharon. Just, is it page 34, 33? The 100% UAGC, is that correct? Or they don't come under community services? Funding, you put a table here. Operational grant, it says 100% UAGC, but it doesn't reflect under swimming pools in the portion of the UAGC.
Excuse me, the OA grant. Yeah, it's UAGC.
So it's 100% on the UAGC, not on the community services side of the UAGC. Under the swimming pool portion of the UAGC. All of it, okay, yeah.
Jules, followed by Michelle, then Sam.
Thank you, Your Worship. I was just going to point out that we've previously identified rates review in the LTP process, and that's coming up in year 3. What we do want to sort out now is the areas you want us to look at. So it sounds like to me that you can't, when you do look at the rates, you've got to look at the whole picture, because we're talking about one little part of the rates. And not that many years ago, we made some decisions, and Balclutha ended up picking up the largest share of Three Waters costs and those sorts of things. We currently have a waste management rate across the district, where if we looked at what does it cost to provide the service for Balclutha and Milton, it would be a lot less, yet we charge the same rate across the whole district. So when you look at our rating system and how we charge for things, there are some things that go one way, there are some things that go another way, and when you're looking at this, you need to look at it as part of the big picture, which we've identified will be in year 3 of this LTP cycle. So I just wanted to make that point that it is on the work program, and if this is a specific area to look at, it makes sense to look at it alongside all those other aspects where we're equalising costs around the district. And exactly in those revenue and financing policies in your LTP, you've said we see a public benefit for part of this cost, and that's why it's spread across the district. We've seen a local benefit for part of this cost, and that's why it's spread a different way. So just wanted to point out that this is part of that big picture of the rates, and the swings and roundabouts all over the place.
And so we're not.
I'm going to Michelle, me, then you.
So the figure there, Kelly, for Lawrence Tuapeka, does that also include the staff member that we're now paying for?
If that is paid through grants, yes.
So, sorry, another question there. Are they going to have to come back each year to get a grant, or is that now there all the time?
So that would depend on the nature of the grant, but it's likely it would be an application by year.
So I've been trying to take a helicopter view of this, and the fact that like the only time I haven't lived in Balclutha, we lived at Clifton, and I know that possibly it was the age of the kids, but there was nothing to do in the winter time. It was pretty much only one thing we did: we shoved them in a couple of cars and we took them down to the Balclutha swimming pool. It was the only facility, so there is a wider need. Do I think, Brent, that it's fair that you get back 10% of yours? No. 1%. Yeah. No, it was $40 out of whatever. Yeah, there's that. So what is the fair balance? And then Jules slapped me around the head and remembered that if we just called this districtisation, we'd all fall back into line again, remembering that the swings and slides were heavily slanted in another topic. And I can tell you, Brett, there ain't no swimming pool in Clinton that's costing as much as the sewage in Clutha and Milton. So swings and slides, are we a district team, or are we, we'll go back into our bunkers, and we're under pressure, I get it. Gainer followed by Dane.
That's what I was just going to say. We're not comparing apples with apples here. This isn't giving us the true picture. So it's really hard to work out because it's not accurate.
It's not apples with apples, but it never will be.
It's really hard.
So I could, if the council so decided, pull the paper, strip out the public pools from the local pools, and we can have a look at it again with those numbers, which would be more accurate to your point.
I think so. I think we need to, so that we're actually deciding on the correct thing. This is not all the information, and it's not all correct the way it's.
If we're in our bunker, that will be the case, but if we honestly want to allocate the staff to go away and have a look at that, Or are we saying that we should be looking at the
Yeah,
water?
I mean, the issue, your worship, it's only a workshop, right? So I'd say to Kelly, it's not about pulling the paper. It's like you're presenting information that we're discussing, we're identifying where we want further info and further discussions around things. That's all it's about. It's going, okay, let's have a look at that side. But you're discussing principles.
He's got a name too.
Yeah.
And then followed by that other one. Yeah.
Yeah,
Simon?
thanks, Pro. The loans, that's per annum, the pool loans table 2. Longest loan, some of those will drop off as they get paid off, correct? Paying off principal and interest. Would have been nice to have known how sort of long they are, but it is a workshop. This is only a workshop on this topic. But I'm telling you now, the funding model of pools is absolutely broken. I'm highly involved in our local pool, and we're absolutely struggling. And here I am. It's not going down a rabbit hole of cross-subsidisation and all this sort of carry on. The actual model of pools, funding pools, is broken. And our community has a fantastic facility. There's massive support from our local community, and we're very, very proud of it. And that is why we're here. And I'm looking, and I'm trying to look for some solutions, right? And this is why we're having this discussion today. So I thought, well, actually, so we've got, and thank you, Kelly. Great report. Great to see all the numbers, and I love numbers. So I crunched away and I looked at some numbers, and I thought, you know what? If I'm paying 75 now, I'm a UAGC towards pools, I'm paying from a key locally, and then I'm doing the volunteer time, and then we're fundraising just to maintain what we've got. I'm thinking about the Clutha pool, council pool, and how that facility is available for our whole district, 12 months of the year. So when our pool closes after 6 months, we've got real swimmers in our community, competition swimmers. So they swim in our local pool, they contribute to it there, they pay for it, they pay through it through their keys, and then when our pool closes down because it's no longer viable, absolutely financially can't do it, they come through to the Clutha pool and then pay their user fees on top, and it's fantastic. So this district definitely needs a council controlled pool that's year round. And I thought, I was looking at it and I started crunching some numbers, and I keep going back to the model's wrong. It's not fair, and this is why we're here. Thanks for the numbers. So I thought, well, hang on a minute. And I looked at the current community pools of Owaka, West Otago, and Clinton, and I gave a figure of $95. They're currently contributing near on $75. So if those 3 communities had an increase to $95, but from that 95, they actually got $65 back. Owaka would end up with an operational grant, potentially an operational grant of $62,000. Their problem's over. Their funding issues, their pool, are over. West Otago, with their 65 times their 1,234 UAGCs, end up with 80,210, and I think West Otago would have no issues. They could have a longer season for their residents. And then Clinton, it's been struggling along, trying to fund their pool, scraping 4,000 whatever a year, would actually end up, on some fairness, with near on 40,000, 39,000 a year. I looked at Lawrence, and Lawrence is a bit different. So I think Lawrence, they're currently paying, I think it was 117, is that right? If Lawrence paid a little bit more at 125, but they got 95 of it actually back to their community, it gave them 88,000. I started thinking about the issues that Lawrence has got. They've got some heating issues coming up. The young guy who looks after their pool rang me up the other week, and so they're in the same. Well, I know that Lawrence is in the same position. One of their committee members rang me. Well, when I do that figure, so they're now giving a portion to our district pools, and then so they end up with 88,000. I think if they had a funding model of 88,000, you're very happy community pool. So then we come to Milton. Now Milton, we're going to have an improvement. Milton want to swim year round, and this is where the real difficulty lies. So I started to try to think of treating Milton the same as Balclutha. Balclutha's currently paying 170 something, are they, per annum? The lower Clutha? Yeah. So crunch that number with the lower Clutha number, and I know we've got to take out Clutha Valley. And I ended up crunching the figure of $200, so it's also an increase. So everyone's having a little increase. Milton now wants to get 365 days of the year swimming. So they pay the 200 as well because they're having a full year pool in their community, whereas all the other little communities are getting 6 months. And I actually got quite close to some of these operational costs. I got Milton at 550,000, 917,000 for Clutha. And then there's the funds, the $30 that the other communities are putting into the district pools. So that figure was $30. If you rate them 95, take 65, right? If you take 125, they get 95 because I got some loans I got to pay. And I ended up, so that ended up being $112,000, and I don't know how you want to split that between Milton and Balclutha. So when I looked at it, it was really, really, when I got the end result of it was it became really, really fair, and everyone's funding model, the funding model was totally improved. We ended up with 66% of what we paid back in our actual district, and I managed to achieve Balclutha getting close to its operational costs.
Well done.
And I'm happy to share those figures because we've got 917 and there's a split at 112. So small increase, change of the model, and then the question you'll ask is, of course, that figure doesn't, we're talking about today as a model of what Milton Pool is. That funding that gives them 550,000 per annum, without that split, for what their current operational and what the reports that we're talking about this afternoon, it services alone. I mean, it's not a new pool, but it's an improvement.
Your Worship, just Kelly has said that one of the things from the review is that the operational funding is not sufficient. Because part of what he was supposed to be doing was identify, what is the current situation, what's the problem. Now, one of the consequences, though, would be, and we'd be looking for your direction, is that, do we do some further work around the consequences of increasing funding, because it has a flow on it, something moves to that table that we had this morning, and we go, okay, again, we're only workshopping, right? We're bringing things back. But the question would be, under the current circumstances, even with things being tight, do you want us to have a look at, because this isn't working or whatever, something that we can bring into the discussion around, okay, is it possibly to bring it in? You could make whatever decision, but at least it would be bringing something in. Otherwise, what we do is you discuss this and go, well, we can't touch this year, we won't do anything until the subsequent year, and that's fine, we carry on with reviews. But you may also say, hey, it's worth it to at least do some homework around what the council's got or what we might have or whatever, pull it together and say what might a new funding model look like and what's the rating consequence, and do you discuss that at the next workshop, for example?
So I've got Simon, John, Bruce.
Yeah, I just wanted to say one of the unfortunate things that we can't really do is get numbers through use the community pools. You got good stats for the two public pools. So unfortunately, that would also be useful, but near impossible to do over the summer. Yeah, which would also be useful.
Through the chair, I understand the point that's being made, and it would be great to have that data. But again, when we divest these two community, how they run and for the benefit of their community, I think they define. So if they serve the needs of their community, they achieve their purpose. So it'd be great to have that comparison, but I think you can move on without it as well.
Because one of the things for numbers, one of the interesting things, when the submissions on the Milton pool, I was quite surprised at how little the kids actually, how little swimming lesson time the kids actually had compared to some of the rural pools. And that'll be the same for Balclutha. It surprised me.
Chuck, followed by Bruce.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. And yes, of course, it is a workshop and there's been some really good stuff coming out here. And well done, Kelly. It's been an arduous task for you. This one, it's been since the long-term plan. But a couple of things. Yes, I agree with Steve. I was going to touch on that. With their workshopping next year, to put our foot on the throat and say no to some things and yes to the others. And this is definitely a yes. And yes, I agree with Councillor Catherwood. It is obvious that the model is broken. Kelly's looking for some direction here. And it is definitely needing change. There's a couple of options here, really. An easy way to deal with it is just to leave it as it is. Forget about it. The fair way, though, is to scrap it all together and start again. And then that way, I'm just looking at a couple of notes here. We start again, so all communities get the same funding from a district-based rate that would probably cost lots of money, but a mix of this would actually drive a few of those communities to get off their bums and actually help make that pool survive on its own too. So there's a real milkshake could be had, and I'm all in favour of having it reviewed.
Bruce.
Yeah, Kelly, mine's an easy one. What's the ED pool?
Education.
If I missed something.
Education department.
ED pool loan on table 1.
Oh, sorry.
Table 1 and table 2.
That's a loan through economic development for the Lawrence Pool, I believe.
Turns out it wasn't easy.
So, through you, Your Worship, when we funded the Lawrence Pool, we decided to do part of it through community services rates and part of it through district-wide. So the part that goes district-wide, the way to fund that is through the economic development as a grant. So that's the district, solely 100% district-wide loan.
Right, there's not so many hands, so there is now hands coming up. Bruce.
Thanks, Your Worship. It would be interesting to know also just, and I don't know, well, it'd be interesting to know for a start just what sort of capital expenditure each of these pools, these community pools, is likely to incur in the next 10 years or so. And I just wonder if that could be incorporated into any report as well, so we get an idea of what those communities are going to have to try and come up with. Because presumably they'll be coming to council for some funding through our investment fund, as we have already done so in the past. We've given community pools considerable funds in some cases to upgrade their facilities. So that's, I think that'll be a part of the information as well. So perhaps we can help those pools target the timing of those, not perhaps realise that suddenly in 1 year there might be half a dozen pools coming for $50,000 or $100,000 or more to upgrade the capital side of things.
Through you, Your Worship, we did actually engage a consultant to do reports for about 4 or 5 of our community pools about 5 or 6 years ago, but that probably doesn't cover all of them. And the feedback I had from that was, thanks very much for this information, but we'll get it done through volunteers and other people, so it won't cost us anywhere near this much.
Yeah. I have that experience, Bruce, because when Truth Valley did actually get that money, we funded direct to the pool, and we decided let's just rip into it. And we were able to do it within 6 months. We might have taken 6 years going through an annual plan. Sorry, Council.
So just through the chair, it's easy to ask the question. They are community pools, they can choose whether or not, but I think most of them would be quite happy to talk about that.
Any further questions, team? I think we've got, what is the direction, Kelly?
So I think there were 3 items, Your Worship. The first is separate that table from public from community pools so that there's clarity around what those figures are talking about. I think there's a request for a new model to be developed. That would obviously be part of a longer cycle, and to ask about capital funding for pools over the next 10-year period. So those 3 items, I think.
Anyone else got anything else?
The actual time period for the funding model is actually urgent.
So what we, I
It's
mean,
not a
what
10-year
we're,
period, is it?
what we're proposing, councillor, is what we can produce for February's workshop. Because you need to make a decision as to, you might even stage it. It might be a bit more complicated than that, and something that might need to take a couple of years. Or you might want immediate relief or something, and you might decide to deal with it. We'll make an opportunity in the February workshop to be able to decide whether or not you want to increase investment for this next financial year, right? So you'll be able to discuss that as the workshop side of things, and whether that's to completely bring in place a new model, or whether it's to allow it to still continue and provide some relief. You can solve that on then, and you'll need to build that into the situation, the 23% start point and all that. But we'll bring it into the February workshop.
Just in closing, Steve, and I know it was discussed at the same time as the pools about the museums. Is it too big a ask to even have that? Because that workshop, because that'll need to be built into the long-term plan workshop in one. I know it's going to be a hell of a lot of pressure on the staff, but
I think the reviews talked about actually pushing that out a year.
Yeah.
And in that sense. And the issue is how many can we do?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
And that there'll be quite a bit of work to bring something in for the pools. That's pretty important.
That's all good. We'll leave it at that.
I'll just highlight to you, you can't change your rating system through this either. That's in year 3, but you can change what you fund within the current rating.
Yeah.
Yes. It allows you to change the grant.
Yeah, you can change your grants, you just can't change how you fund everything this time around unless you go through and change all your rating policies.
So we're done on team? You happy, Kelly?
I would like to acknowledge the many community people that put hours and hours into these facilities. They need more recognition.
Is there anything else, Sharon, Steve, anyone, Pete, you want to cover? We've done it.